will come to order. This is a meeting of the Bloomington Common Council for the 1st of April 2020. This is the second special session conducted electronically pursuant to the Governor's Executive Order 2002, declaring a public health emergency for the COVID-19 outbreak, as well as several further executive orders. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Rallo?
Here.
Scambaluri?
Here.
Rosenbarger?
Here.
Sims?
Here.
Wolin?
Here.
Piedmont Smith?
Here.
Flaherty?
Here.
Smith?
Here.
And Sandberg?
Here.
All
Thank you.
present and accounted for. Tonight's agenda includes reports from council members, reports from the mayor and city offices, in particular, a report from the Economic Stability and Recovery Working Group, reports from council committees, and then reports from the public. Reports from council committees, I think, will include appointments to boards and commissions. We will have legislation for first reading, including Appropriation Ordinance 2001 to specially appropriate from the Food and Beverage Tax Fund expenditures related to the convention center expansion and support of local tourism during the COVID-19 emergency. I see appointments of boards and commissions will be after first reading. We'll have the council schedule, discussion, and adjournment followed immediately by a committee of the whole to discuss Appropriation Ordinance 2001 should council see fit this evening. With that, we're going to go to reports from council members. This will be the first time that members have had a chance to speak to the public since a month ago. Is there anyone who would like to speak? I'll start with Councilmember Smith.
Sure. It's been a tough last month, and I know everybody's reaching out, trying to help each other, and that's a really great thing, and it certainly makes us all feel better. I looked at my job in the real world is working with people out in the public, in elderly and disabled in their homes, and I did an informal poll of the providers, probably about 10 or 15 providers, about if they had masks, have equipment. And all of them said, yes, we have an adequate supply. Some of them are sewing masks. Some of them are cobbling it together from old supplies. And some of them have been able to order some of them online. So that we're kind of holding the line at that point. But I just wanted to let everybody know that, at least from my perspective, things are being held up, and we're doing a pretty darn good job in the scary times. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Smith. Councilmember Sims.
Hi. I didn't have comments, but I think I will. Thank you. As my council member just previously stated, this has been a very tough time for us. I do believe things are continue to be tough for a while, but I think this too shall pass. But at first, what I'd really like to thank or acknowledge is the staff and the folks at the United Way, Monroe County United Way, and some of the things they're doing in Monroe County and Greene and in Owen, the Community Foundation, and I think that's a Bloomington and Monroe County, and IU Health Bloomington's Foundation. And I think many of us already know what a lot of the funds that they've collected and how they're utilizing it to help those in our community that have basically been hardest hit. And there's so many in this community that are doing things to help lighten the load overall. Things like the food train that we're delivering food across the city to help those in need. I know that the food bank is just very, very busy because many of the food pantries across the city are needing to be restocked and replenished so that we can help a lot of those folks. And as you can imagine, most of that need has increased since this COVID-19 has started. And even our little small pantry at Second Baptist, we replenish it, restock it, help as many people as we can, and do it all over again. And I think that is being replicated many, many times across this community. And there are so many others out in the community that's helping. I don't know of all of them. And if I keep talking, I'm sure I'll not mention someone, and I don't want to offend anyone. I just want to say thank you. Bloomington is a great community to be involved in. Can we do better? Yes. Will we do better? Yes, I believe we will. But as we are now, I just want to offer my thanks to everyone that's helping us get through this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Sims. Councilmember Scambluri.
Yes, I want to acknowledge a group that has done a staggering amount of work this week, and that is an economic stabilization and recovery group. This was recommended by Mayor Hamilton and includes Alex Crowley of our Economic and Sustainable Development Office, Jennifer Pearl of the Bloomington Economic Development Corporation, Aaron Predmore of the Chamber, Sean Starwitz and Jane Coopersmith, also of Economic and Sustainable Development, Brian Payne of CDFI Bloomington, and Pat East of Dimension Mill, Inc. The COVID crisis has created a number of immediate needs for us and a number of demands on any number of people for quick response to it. It also is going to require us to think long-term, and this group has done amazing work thinking about how we are going to support our local businesses and employers in the coming months. And I just want to applaud them. We will hear more of their work tonight, but I've been sitting in on daily check-in calls with this group every morning, and I've watched the plan that they'll be talking about go from an idea to a pretty well-developed, fleshed-out plan in 72 hours. And I just want to applaud them for that and thank them for their work on behalf of our local businesses and our employers. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Scambluri. Councilmember Sandberg.
Thank you. This is a time to thank a lot of people, and I want to especially mention my own community neighborhood of Matlock Heights. We are a close-knit neighborhood to begin with, always looking out for one another, and we are relatively compact, and we keep in touch even in normal times. But the leadership of the Matlock Heights Neighborhood Association has done a really good job reaching out, making sure that we're all checking in, especially some of our more elderly neighbors who may have some needs. And so kudos to Matlock. And I'm sure there are neighborhoods across the city that are being good neighbors and looking out for one another. And that needs to be mentioned, because I think that's a big part of what makes Bloomington such a special place. Also, while we're giving thanks, a big thanks to the continuation of city government team, and also our council liaison, Dave Rollo, for keeping us all informed of that really excellent work that's going on there too. So as many of my colleagues have said, there are so many people to thank, a lot of people stepping up and taking charge of where some of the need gaps are. And so thank you to all who are doing that.
Thank you, Councilmember Sandberg. Councilmember Flaherty.
Sure. Yeah, I'll echo the comments of others and just briefly thank also city staff, most of whom are continuing to work through this emergency and challenge, albeit through in unique circumstances. So whether it's, folks that are at City Hall or Public Works or utilities and out in the field, everybody's having to find new ways to get to work and work within this, within the limits of staying safe and healthy while still delivering city services. So I know it's been a challenge for the city, and certainly the continuity of city government team that Councilmember Sandberg mentioned has been leading that charge. So thanks to all the city workers. Also, I just wanted to briefly mention that in addition to the Economic Stabilization and Recovery Working Group, Mayor Hamilton has also convened a working group on social services led by many in philanthropy in Bloomington, and the Climate Action and Resilience Committee of City Council is liaising with that group, which is also headed up by Beverly Calendar Anderson with the city. So I just wanted to mention that for anybody watching, if you have questions or ideas or input in the context of community resilience, by all means, feel free to reach out to me or the other members of the Climate Action and Resilience Committee, which includes Council members Rollo, Piedmont Smith, and Rosenbarger. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Flaherty. Councilmember Rollo.
Yeah, thanks. Well, the continuity of city government group has already been mentioned, and I just wanted to say what an excellent job that they've been doing, department heads and Deputy Mayor Bernissen, Mayor Hamilton, essentially to keep the city running, keep vital services going, protect city staff, protect the public who may still visit City Hall, and particularly mission critical staff, for instance, in public safety and at the water treatment plant and so forth, to protect them so they can continue doing their job. I also wanted to just mention that I think that I wanted to make a call out to the Bloomington Quilters Guild, that is bloomingtonquiltersguild.org, because they've been doing a really great effort in organizing mask making. We know that masks are in short supply. We know that the N95s are particularly needed by healthcare workers, and so we don't want to compete with healthcare workers in terms of securing masks, but cloth masks can work very well. And they work as a barrier to prevent you from getting infected, to prevent if you're asymptomatic or you're just starting to show symptoms, to keep you from spreading it. It's a good means by which you can prevent touching your face, which is one avenue by which you get infected. And then it may actually attenuate the severity depending upon the dosage that you get. So if you get a smaller viral load by having a mask, that's probably going to be better for you than getting a lot of virus at once. So for all those reasons, I think we've been hearing more and more about it, that it's a good idea to wear a mask in public. And I imagine that very soon we're all going to be wearing masks. We're going to see everybody wearing masks in public. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Rallo. Councilmember Rosenbarger.
Hi, thanks. I really don't have anything new to add. I mean, I am just so thankful for everyone working around the clock, and grateful for all of our, health workers and grocery workers, folks who are out there doing their essential jobs to help keep everything going. So thanks a lot. That's it.
Thank you, Councilmember Rosenbarger. Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yes, I don't know if I have anything to say that hasn't already been said. I am very impressed by neighbors, friends, colleagues, professionals reaching out and tackling this problem from various perspectives. The Bryant Park Neighborhood Association has an active email list among the neighborhoods that I represent. That's the most active email list, and there have been wonderful ideas, wonderful volunteer opportunities. The neighbors have gotten together to make kits for Shalom Center, to make masks, to share meditation techniques, to have rainbows in the windows so people can go for a walk with their kids and they can count the rainbows, to have packed lunches for Wheeler Mission. So I know this is happening in all the neighborhoods in Bloomington, and I think that's the very thin silver lining in this pandemic, is that it is showing the best in people and bringing out the best and showing that our community really is filled with people who want to help. So I really admire that, and I commend that. I wanted to just mention with the masks, of course, my colleague, Councilmember Rallo, is absolutely right. The homemade masks are a lot better than nothing, but they don't make you invincible. They're not like a surgical mask. They're not like the 95 grade masks. So I do recommend people wear them in public and keep making them for our frontline people. But you still need to be very careful, even if you're wearing one of the homemade masks. So I think that's all from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Piedmont Smith. I'm glad to hear that the neighbors are getting together, as long as it's not too close, to help with Shalom Center. But this is the new reality. April has come, and the news is we're going to be doing this for a period measured not in weeks anymore, but perhaps in months. And what we're going to be doing is essential business only, not just in council, but everyone has been admonished by the state government that we need to shelter in place for the foreseeable future. So I'm grateful for all the reports I've heard from my colleagues about how the citizens of Bloomington have risen to the occasion. But we need to brace ourselves that the news is probably going to get worse before it gets better. So I urge everyone to steel themselves, to resolve themselves to, make our way through this crisis intact as one community. With that, we're going to go now to a report from the mayor and his offices to discuss details of the response to the crisis. Mr. Mayor, would you like to present?
Thank you very much. Can you all hear me okay? Give me a thumbs up, somebody. Okay, good. Thank you. It's really nice to see your faces. Good to be together in these new ways. And I want to just echo you all discussed in such good ways, many good things happening in the community to be thankful for, and thanking our neighbors and our people doing the work that you all talked about. I won't repeat all of that, just affirm it and add my thanks on behalf of everybody. I've said we're in a marathon that starts with a sprint. I think we're probably still in the sprint, but we're looking at the marathon soon. There's been a pretty intense effort to get a lot of things up to speed. A lot of that is happening, has happened. Of course, there's more to do in this sprint, but I also think we're starting to think about what's the marathon going to be like. As you referenced, we do expect, we don't know, I can't add any inside information, but I would expect the governor's going to add some weeks to the stay-at-home order that officially is still scheduled to end next week. But I certainly expect that that's going to get extended. So I appreciate the chance to come here, give you updates every week as we continue to respond to this health emergency and answer your questions and give updates and get some dialogue and let the public hear about this too via CATS. And I appreciate everybody listening in who wants to get updated. Thank again all the employees, all our residents. I'll just note thank you for all of your work, the 9 of you and the clerk and the staff who are helping keep things moving at the city council and clerk office level, including thanks for your review of the food and beverage ordinance tonight, which is an important investment in our continued cooperation. We look forward to that. So jumping into some updates, as has been referenced, the continuity of city government team is continuing. I think they've had 8 meetings now in 2.5 weeks or so. They're meeting now regularly twice a week. We appreciate the participation of all on that, including Clerk Bolden and Councilmember Rollo, as well as a number of administration folks. That group, again, in a sprint, but also thinking about the marathon, is really working very hard to keep city government functioning, protecting against risk, both as an institution and as all our employees. One big step happening this week is I think it's called the Families First Coronavirus Relief Act, something like that. That is a federal law that kicks in today, April 1st. The big things that are relevant for you to know, that does create a particular 2 weeks paid leave that we are making available to every employee who is dealing with a certain category of things, in particular if they're sick or if they're caregiving for someone who's sick, and a couple other categories like that. That's going to be available to all of our employees. There's also a provision of that act that creates a family medical leave, 12-week leave that is also paid, though at 2/3 level, basically. This is a federal mandate. We exempt from that 12-week family medical leave, which is designed specifically for people who need to care for a dependent under 18 due to school closings or childcare closings. We under the law, we are to exempt emergency responders, and we've identified those, many that you would think of, police and fire and dispatch, also waterworks folks, sanitation is included. And that list has gone out to employees. We will continue to work with that, but that kicks in today, and that's going to be a relief to some. We by the way, you should know we don't get federal reimbursement for that. That's at least in the current setup. Another update, you all probably are aware, we did have our first employee of the city with a confirmed COVID-19 diagnosis, a firefighter. They were diagnosed to confirmation last Saturday, a few days ago. They have been in isolation before that and have been since. I can report to you, I'm happy to report to you that this firefighter is doing very well and is actually itching to get back to work. And they will be back to work when the protocols are met to assure no transmission risk. We also implemented protocols, as we have ready in every place, when a person has been confirmed that way, that were put into place with the fire department, with other people being isolated and other things like that. Our parks, just one of the examples of what the continuity of city government does, our parks department, of course, we closed playgrounds last week. We're continuing to monitor. We do want to let people get outside, exercise with safe physical distance. We did determine that the basketball hoops were not amenable to that. We hoped people could, but they couldn't. So those hoops have been closed and chalked and locked up. Changes at the golf course and a lot of protocols like that happening, and signage all over encouraging people when they're outside to be careful. And we will continue to monitor that. That's the kind of thing that the continuity of city government keeps looking at regularly. Just some updates too on police, I think that may be of interest to you. We have a really excellent collaboration going with the IU Police Department. We okay? Hear me? Excellent collaboration going with the IU Police Department. In particular, as students have returned to town, we do see some, and we get reports of some anecdotally, and I've seen some myself, of students gathering in ways that are probably not consistent with the governor's order. The IU police and the Bloomington police have kind of carved up the city with the IU police taking areas closer to campus, both west and east, north, to say if we have reports of people gathering in parties or gatherings that are not consistent with the stay-at-home order, the IU police are going to respond directly in those areas. The Bloomington police will respond directly in the other parts of the city. And one thing you should know, the IU campus and IU officials have been very cooperative in wanting to make clear their relationship to those students and to make clear to those students that they are expected to comply with the stay at home unless you have essential business order. And the university is taking that very seriously in terms of their connection with the university in relationship to the dean of students. So we're happy with that. Just one other note, Council, related to the changes in protocols. You know, the police, I think I told you before, the police have changed, trying to reduce any arrests, if not necessary, particularly for misdemeanors or lower level crimes, in order to relieve pressure at the jail. And you probably saw the report today. It's very good. The jail population is actually down by 1/3 in the last month, both because of the county judicial system releasing people, but also because of the police department, and I think the sheriff too, trying to reduce to the minimum necessary people being introduced to the jail. So all that's happening, and many other things, and happy to talk about those. I also wanted to report that I continue to coordinate with the kind of the health and civic leadership, including the leadership of Indiana University, IU Health, County Health Department, county commissioners, and some of staff. 3 times a week, we meet regularly, virtually, to coordinate, report, share information, responses. That's the kind of thing that can lead to that great police response as well. We also now have a weekly press conference Friday afternoon at 1:15. That group all is available. We share our updates. We take questions from the press and the public to the extent there's time. And I'm really appreciative of that group moving forward with that and trying to keep the public as informed as we can be. And also, I appreciate you letting me do this each Wednesday, which helps do the same thing. Lastly, in terms of updates, you've heard mention of both of the working groups. I'm really very, very pleased with these groups. I asked to stand up because we have this excellent collaboration and coordination on the health-focused effort, which of course is front and center, but there are these at least two parallel, very important lanes, and you'll hear shortly from Beverly Calendar Anderson, who's coordinating the group of 5 philanthropic and civic organizations to really address where are the gaps, the threats, the immediate needs and short-term needs in the social service safety net that are related to COVID-19. Things like the immediate housing isolation that's so important, things like childcare for essential workers when we have so many childcare centers closed, things like food security. And that group has done a great job trying to align those resources, find the gaps, and in short order will be helping us try to assemble those resources. I would not be surprised if they come to us, to City Council, asking for support, and we look forward to that discussion. Second group also referenced is the Economic Stabilization and Recovery Group, as outlined by Councilmember Scambaluri, and you'll hear from Alex Crowley with a brief update about their work. Again, that economically, and how do we try to minimize the economic pain immediately and help people stabilize both at a family level and at a small business or small enterprise level, and then also thinking longer term, 12 months and 36 months even. What is it going to be like as we come out of this? So I really appreciate their work, and you'll hear more from them. Lastly, just closing final thoughts, I'd say stay at home. It's really important if you can flatten the curve. We're trying to help our healthcare system, our community. Don't try to find loopholes. Find the spirit, adopt the spirit of this, which is to diminish the threat of interacting and sharing the virus as much as we can, all of us, while those doing the essential work do so. It will get tougher before it's going to get easier. We don't know exactly how long, and I hope the health group I talked about will be able to share some modeling soon about what we forecast the peak to be. We don't know that yet, but it's going to get tough before it gets easier. We need to keep protecting each other in our community. This is very serious. If you're sick, feel sick, don't go to work. We do have protocols to check that. There will be more testing arriving, though there's certainly not enough of that in our community. But it's wonderful how people are taking care of each other. It's important to do that. We will get through it. We know we're going to come out on the other side of this. We're trying to minimize the damage as we go through it and maximize our chance of recovering as quickly as we can on the other side of this. So I'll be happy. I'm going to turn over to Beverly and then to Alex, and then maybe open it up for all three of us for questions, if that's okay with you, President Vola.
Yes, I think that sounds fine. Let's go now to Philippa Guthrie.
Sorry, it's Beverly Calendar Anderson next.
Oh, I'm sorry. Wait, so it's Beverly and then Alex. Is Philippa also presenting?
Not. She'll be presenting later in the food and beverage tax appropriation.
I see. Let's go now to Beverly Calendar Anderson, Director of Community and Family Resources. Hello, Ms. Calendar Anderson.
Hello, President Boland, and good evening, council members. Just have a quick update. The mayor talked about the social services working group. Just want to tell you a little bit about what we've been working on and where we're headed. And to start with, I just want to let you know, I've been so honored to work with the members of this group. It consists of John Barretta with the Bloomington Health Foundation, Diane Bazell at IU Health Foundation, Efrat Pfefferman with United Way of Monroe County, Tina Peterson with Community Foundation, and Dan Smith at Indiana University Foundation. And so we have been meeting to really look at proposing a plan or a policy that is designed to be pliable. We realize that it's going to have to be a flexible plan that will identify the emerging gaps that need to be addressed over the next 45, 90, or 180 days in order to secure the Monroe County basic needs safety net as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we're looking specifically in the areas of food, shelter, health and safety, and childcare. Those seem to be the largest or the biggest emerging needs. We're currently identifying key stakeholders and resources. That's our stage one. When we move on to stage two, and so stage one is probably in interviewing those stakeholders, and that's we'll be doing that and probably have that piece of our work done by Friday. Then we'll synthesize that into a document and start to come up with ideas about how to move forward, have a refinement stage, and then an implementation stage, which is stage 5. And like I said, we're looking at the next 45, 90, 180 days. We'll be benchmarking that. We're considering what federal and state financial aid might be coming down the pike and be available, and what might be the role of financial institutions as well. So that's pretty much what we're doing, looking at our capacity versus needs in each of those 4 areas. And we are looking at other communities and what some other communities have done, especially communities that are similar in size and structure to ours. And we're also going to be looking nationally and seeing what other ideas and information we can gather that way. So I just wanted to take a few short minutes just to let you know about that. I'm happy to answer any questions. Maybe after Alex, you may have questions for the both of us. So.
Yes, we can go to Mr. Crowley now. Alex Crowley from Economic and Sustainable Development.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, President Volan and everyone for giving me a couple minutes to talk. I'm Alex Crowley, Director of Economic and Sustainable Development for the city. So first of all, it was a pleasure to present to the Sustainable Development Committee of the City Council yesterday. We went into some depth on what I'll summarize today, but thank you to Council members Scamboleri, Volan, Sandberg, and Flaherty for their input in the process. It was very helpful, and we will integrate that into our future thinking. In light of the fact that we're going to spend only a few minutes here, I just wanted to give you a brief summary. I'll focus on the short-term activities in the interest of time. And I will try to get very fancy here and project my screen, which has been disabled, but hopefully will become enabled. It is a great group of people that's working on the working group. It includes, as was mentioned, Jennifer Pearl, who's with Jen Pearl, who's with the BEDC, Aaron Predmore with the Bloomington Chamber of Commerce, the Greater Bloomington Chamber of Commerce, Pat East with Dimension Mill Inc., Brian Payne with CDFI Friendly Bloomington, and then from the ESD staff at the city, Jane Cooper-Smith and Sean Starowitz. We're also very pleased to have Councilmember Scamboleri join us regularly as an interface to the council. That's been very helpful. So anyway, we are pursuing a multi-pronged strategy, as the mayor mentioned. We are looking first at rapid response. And then we are also looking at recovery, which we're thinking of as being a sort of 4-month to 12-month period, and then long-term revitalization, which is really 12 to 36 months. So we're trying to balance all 3, but we very much have a focus on the rapid response right now because that is the most urgent need. We've gotten a lot of feedback along the way. We've interfaced with resources at the university, like the IBRC, which is the Business Resource Center at the university. The Cook Center, Downtown Bloomington Inc., Visit Bloomington, and many others who have been really helpful in providing information on the ground, information about the economic situation, as well as top-down information about what the marketplace as a whole looks like and what we can expect in terms of having to do rapid response. So things are very much in progress right now. It's fairly fluid with the CARES Act becoming a little bit more clearly defined in the last, sort of 72 hours. And there are also other programs that are evolving potentially from the state and even potentially additional phases of the CARE Act. So we're trying to stay abreast of what's happening while we're developing local strategy. But basically the immediate— Mr.
Crowley, your screen sharing is enabled now if you want to try to share your screen.
Oh, okay. Let's try this. I was just going to show off the team. Can everybody see the team? So anyway, I don't know. Can you hear me? Everything okay?
Yeah. You're still visible. We can still hear you.
Okay, good. The rapid response includes funding and non-funding efforts. So on the funding efforts, and we appreciate you looking at the food and beverage tax this evening, our efforts include basically 4 steps, which is number 1, to establish the need. Number 2, to determine what the funding sources may be to meet that need. Number 3, and very importantly, to build a administrative function that allows us to disseminate funding in a way that is fiscally responsible and disciplined. And then number 4, to measure that impact and also report back both to the council and the public and other stakeholders about the effects of the program. So next steps are for us to take what was called version 2 of a plan that we had submitted to the mayor and update that to reflect the latest thinking that we have. We expect that to be available to the mayor by the end of the week and then to council at the beginning of next week and the public following that. So we look forward to sharing that with you. And again, it will reflect some of the latest thinking that comes from the finalization of the CARES Act and other information that's come our way. We also will finalize rapid response funding and non-funding programs. There's a lot of work being done to stand those up. And so we look forward to having those become available as they are finalized and ready for the public. And then finally, I just want to say there is this great resource at Monroe County COVID-19.org. I'm showing the link here. And I would encourage the public, if you're not aware of this, this is being hosted by the Greater Bloomington Chamber of Commerce. We really appreciate them doing it. And there's this a great compilation of information on that site that allows for people to self-serve for some programs that are available already, and then also to get information about things that are coming their way. So I will stop there and stop sharing my screen. And I will ask, I guess, if I stop sharing my screen, I will then open myself up for questions.
Thank you. Well, we didn't actually see anything. I didn't see any shared screen, and audio dropped a little bit near the end, but I think we heard everything. Thank you, Mr. Crowley. Yeah, no, yeah.
Maybe
yeah,
next
thank you.
time.
I'll get it eventually.
No, we appreciate the effort very much. I don't know if every member has had a chance to see the second draft of the report that the ESR working group has prepared. It is a pretty thorough document. I recommend reading. I'm looking forward to seeing what work product the group that Ms. Callender Anderson is leading as well too, when that becomes available. But with that, I'd like to open it up to questions from members for any of the 3 who have presented tonight. Is there anyone who has any questions about it? Councilmember Rallo.
Thank you. Well, this is to Alex Crowley. I have a question about the CARES Act. Have you been able to establish maybe that there are gaps within the CARES Act that we might be able to fill, or is it too soon to evaluate it in that way? And I'm also thinking of evaluating needs of specific businesses in the community. I mean, is there a metric that we can employ, because resources are limited locally, so to be most efficient? And I haven't read the latest version, so if it's included in there, you can just direct me to it.
Well, let me answer that quickly, and then, but it is, as you say, it's kind of evolving. But the CARES Act is frankly pretty impressive and pretty robust. It helps employees, workers. It helps, obviously it helps large businesses. It also helps small businesses and individuals. So it's a pretty strong play. It's going to be, it's time limited. So there's going to be some drop off after a certain period of time. We'll see if that covers enough. So I think in the early term, what we've been able to figure out about it is, and we're becoming quickly trying to read up on it, that some of the gaps that are there have to do primarily with timing and when resources might become available. So one of the things we're looking closely at is to be able to create bridge loans that can go out, cover people for a short period of time. And then when things like SBA emergency funding or other funding becomes available, that funding actually can be used, it appears, to repay existing loans. And so those loans then can be immediately repaid and potentially recycled into additional tranches of support out into the community. So I think I would answer the first question by saying the biggest gap that we can tell right now is a gap of timing and availability of resources coming from the federal government. And so tactical bridge loaning and potentially grants could be a way to fill that. In terms of your second question, which was to, what was your second question again? I'm sorry.
Councilor Borrello.
Attempting to unmute, sorry. My second question was about a way in which we can have a metric to evaluate business needs relative to each other, and to target that funding so that we can be, optimally used optimally.
Yeah, so that's going to be a complicated game, but at a macro level, we can look at industry sector groupings within the community and understand that, anecdotally, what's happening with a handful of them is probably able to be extrapolated across the others. So there's a way to do it from a top-down perspective by saying, for example, restaurants, we're hearing X percentage of, we're doing some bottoms-up research, so we're doing surveys out of the chamber and some other data gathering, but so we can figure out that we're estimating X being an impact at a certain industry code level. So we know how many businesses there are, and we know how many employees that affects because we have that data from the IBRC. So we can make estimates about what that could be. But I should say that the rubber will hit the road when we open up and receive applications, and that will be that application process is being finalized. It will be posted everywhere, and then we're going to communicate the heck out of it so that people know what's out there. That will be really the detail that we fundamentally need to establish what exactly is going on, and we will use that. But there are going to be some businesses that will not qualify. I mean, there are businesses where they, I think it's tough to say this, but there are going to be some businesses that are in a financial situation that will not be adequately stabilized for success with limited funding that we have. And if those businesses are eligible for whatever reason for funding coming out of some of the much more substantial federal programs, it's going to be tough for them. So we're going to have to be pretty selective. It's a fair amount of money for any individual, but it's not in aggregate enough to really carry an economy. And so we have to be pretty selective about how we use it in the loan and grant phase of this.
Further questions from council members? Councilor Scambolari.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Crowley, for the report. We're going to spend a lot of this evening talking about money and monetary support in the appropriation ordinance. But you also mentioned non-funding related assistance, and I think that's important too, particularly in navigating this rather complex landscape. Could you talk just a little bit more about that and how that can help organizations?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's in fact, that's a very important part of this. We, those of us who are paying close attention to federal funding programs and are reading all the details, we're pretty well informed, but the general public will not be. And so we feel that there are things that can be done in the short term, and I'll give you some examples just to give you a sense of what those are. So number one, a navigator function, help desk, if you will, to help individuals or businesses figure out how to leverage what's happening from the federal and potentially the state government, and also to be able to expertise in the community that can help them take care of what they need. So there's a navigating function that's very useful and helpful, and we're standing that up, and Dimension Mill Inc. is leading the charge on that. Another example is actually something that our department is helping the Parks Department with, and we've gotten great help from the Controller's Office and others at the city. It's a virtual farmers market. That is a product that we've thought about for a while, but this has accelerated that. And so we're rushing it to market. It is basically a software platform that we've purchased that allows growers in the community to connect with purchasers in the community, buyers, individuals. I just signed up for it. I would encourage you to do it. Go to Bloomington, the Bloomington website / farmers market online. You can set up an account and then you can actually purchase vegetables that are grown locally and delivered to the Switchyard Park on Saturday, and you pick them up and off you go. So it's, that kind of non-funding support. We're spending money on it, but we're really standing up a process for people to take advantage of, both from a buying and selling perspective. And Rachel Byer in the ESD department, she's a USDA grant position, has been chasing that down relentlessly. She's been amazing. Another example is something we actually saw from Arizona. It's a mapping function that lays out in a map restaurants, for example, who are doing takeout or other services that are actually open, and mapping it out in such a way that it becomes intuitive for someone who's looking for services within the community that are within the governor's order. So that is currently being worked on through the Mill. It's actually a 39 Degrees North, which is a local company, a local startup that's chasing that down, and they're trying to stand it up as quickly as possible to give people an opportunity, small businesses, to continue commerce, even if it's in a non-traditional way. And so, those are different examples of another one is actually talent sharing. So kind of like if you know what Upwork is, where someone has a job that needs to get done and someone has a talent that can be matched with that. The city is doing that, leveraging some capacity that we have at the city to help other departments. So we're using an internal system, thanks to the mayor, to really set that up and allow for sharing between departments. But if you take that to community level, a business that may not know how to go online could be helped by an individual who knows how to support someone going online. And so that kind of talent sharing functionality is another way to stimulate the move to what may be an uncomfortable way to do commerce in the short term, while leveraging talent that we have in the community. So those are all, just examples of the kinds of things that we can put up and help support and help communicate that we're working on right now.
Great, thank you for that. And can you repeat the Farmers Market online website, please?
Sure. So it's at the Bloomington, it's the City of Bloomington website, which is bloomington.in.gov/ Farmers Market Online. And if you go to it, you sign up. I just did it. You sign up for an account, and it will become active. There's a glitch with technology with the state, but it got cleared. And we are going to be opening it up for commerce starting hopefully as early as either this evening or tomorrow morning.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you for all your hard work.
Further questions for city administration?
Isabel.
City Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yeah, I'm sorry to harp on this, but what is that website again? Because I typed it in as you were saying it, Mr. Crowley, and it didn't bring me anything. Is there an apostrophe in there somewhere?
I don't think there is. I think it's just Farmers Market Online. So it's bloomington.in.gov/ right? So Farmers Market Online.
It's not coming up for me either.
Yeah, page not found.
Let me try it. Hold on 1 second.
That's okay. We can figure it out later.
Just as a point of information, I know sometimes when you're editing a web page, that page will be down for a moment. So that could be the correct website if someone's actively working on it right now. It might not be functioning. So that may be the cause.
Go to the city website. It'll be there.
Further questions from members? Councilmember Smith.
Thank you very much for the presentation, Mr. Crowley and Ms. Callender Anderson. And the question I had was, so we have a business, is it a catch-all site or is it a catch-all telephone number that businesses could call for some assistance? And then on the flip side of that, is there going to be some kind of a catch-all site, a call site for social services that if people are experiencing stress at home during this time, for whatever reasons, that we recommend they call 211 or whatever. So whoever wants to respond to those questions, thank you.
So I can go first on the social services site. One of the things we would ask people to do is go to helpingbloomingtonmonroe.org. That is, it's, so 211 is a staffed line. Helping Bloomington Monroe is a 24/7 line, and it's on, everything is online. There are multiple resources that are loaded in that. And so whether it's, if someone is looking for shelter or food or mental health services, or they just put in their zip code and it will tell them everybody that, or every agency in their zip that serves that zip code. So not that is actually in that zip code, but that serves that zip code. Mm-hmm. And there are ways for them to link directly to the agency, call, set up an appointment, and do a lot of things like that. So.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
It was online farmers market, not farmers market online. There you go.
And will you please repeat the website that you just told me, helpingbloomington.org?
Helpingbloomingtonmonroe.org.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Further questions for staff from council members? Councilmember Rallo.
Thank you.
Councilmember Rallo?
Yes, thanks.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
This is for Ms. Callender Anderson. I understood that $350,000 will be available next week from the group, and I wondered about the, could you describe the distribution of those monies, where it's targeted to go?
So not from our group. I think you may be thinking about the grants that were granted from Community Foundation and United Way of Monroe County. And so that money has been granted. I don't have a list with me, but I can get that to you.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'll take a question if nobody minds. Ms. Callender Anderson, maybe you can tell us about the state of repurposed housing for the duration. I know that there's been concern about where homeless have been sheltered, even as there are many hotels and dormitories that are now devoid of occupants. Is your committee addressing that concern? And if so, what conclusions, if any, have you come to so far?
So our committee is sort of looking, like I said, 45, 90, and 180 days out. So for the immediate needs like that, we have a subgroup of us that have been looking at what resources we have available. I've been working with Fire Chief Jason Moore, to see what properties would be safe for the number of people that need to be sheltered during this time. Of course, you probably know that Shalom, Wheeler, New Hope, and Middleway House established an isolation shelter. And so I think it's waiting on its final inspection from the state fire chief. But so if there is someone who has symptoms and need to be isolated, they have at least a place for that right now. So now we're looking to help them find some places for social distancing purposes, so that people are able to be the amount of feet apart that they need to be to stay healthy. But we also want it to be safe for them. So
thank you.
So we are working on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Also, is there a draft of your report circulating yet?
There is, and I sent it to Mr. Sherman last night, so you may not have gotten it, but I can make sure that everyone gets to all the council members.
Yeah, we look forward to that one as well.
Mm-hmm.
Any further questions from members?
May I just add a moment?
Yeah, of course, Mr. Mayor.
Just to, as Beverly said, And thanks again to both Alex and Beverly for great work. An example of what that group may try to do is we have multiple space needs. For example, we have already heard from IU Health some concern in thinking about childcare for their workers who are going to be heading into really tough sledding here over the next few weeks. And they're also talking about housing for their workers who may not want to go back and forth. They may live a couple counties away, and if they're intensively working. So one of the things this group needs to do is think about the different assets we have and whether that asset is better for housing for healthcare staff, or whether it's better for isolation housing for people who don't have housing, or whether it's better for childcare usage, and trying to align and coordinate that, because we have multiple needs that are lining up and pressing right now. And it's really important to have a group that helps coordinate and collaborate that with our wonderful social service providers. So I really appreciate their work on that.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay, seeing none. Oh, Mr. Crowley.
Just clarify, I'm sorry, this was me trying to do it from memory, and that's always a bad idea. That the site is bloomington.in.gov/online farmers market.
Right.
I emailed it to the council email address, so you have it as well.
And we got a glimpse of it on our shared screen a few moments ago.
Right.
Wonderful. Thank you all again for the presentation. With that, we're going to move into the rest of our agenda. Next up are reports from council committees. Are there any council committees to report? If not, we'll go down to reports from the public. Mr. Lucas, do you have any sense of how many people have wanted to speak tonight on the COVID-19 emergency? Has anybody?
No, I've not received any chat requests right now. Now might be a good time to ask folks if they'd like to make a comment before.
If there's anyone who is attending the meeting virtually who would like to make public comment, now is a good opportunity. If you would indicate your interest by typing in the chat box, Mr. Lucas will acknowledge you, and depending on how many people will speak, you'll have up to 5 minutes to speak. Is there anyone who would like to speak from the public? Now is an opportunity.
And this is for items that are not on the agenda. So if you'd like to speak about the food and beverage tax appropriation, that will occur later.
That's correct. Please enter some text into the chat now to let Mr. Lucas know that you would like to speak. If you'd like to speak publicly, here is your opportunity. Mr. Lucas?
No takers yet. And we do have a couple of different hosts on the meeting this evening, so I apologize. I believe I'll see any chat that comes through, but if that's the issue, send your chat to council meeting host.
There's one raised hand.
Oh, I do see, yes. Give me 1 second.
You may also choose the raise hand function in Zoom.
I think we've got Greg Alexander. Can you hear us? Can you?
Yep.
Perfect. You should be good to go.
Okay. Hi, Greg Alexander. I just figured I should let you know I'm still here for Sidewalks. I wanted to tell a story about a friend of mine on Facebook. This is a different story than the last time, but it's actually the same story, even though it's a different person. She lives up in Blue Ridge, and so that's on the north side of town between Walnut and Dunn, north of the bypass. And so she works at IU, and her car died, and she's not made of money. So even though, she lives up there, she knows she's going to buy a new car, she's going to fix the car or something, but she can't buy or rent a car. She can't use Uber every day just to get to work. And so she walked. And so she walked down Dunn, where there's no sidewalks, a lot of high-speed traffic around rush hour, and she walked in that. And then she walked across the bypass, and she walked in the parking lot, because that's there's no sidewalk south of the bypass that'll get her where she needed to go, on Dunn. And she goes to the IU bus stop, which is really nice. They have the bus stop in the stadium parking lot. And so she then could take the bus to go to work, and this worked for her. You know, people who feel lucky to have a job will do that if they have to. And but that's a mile and a half of walking, basically most of that, about at least a half mile of it without any sort of sidewalk whatsoever, of walking. And that's kind of a lot of walking to take the bus. Most people won't do that as their daily commute, but people who feel lucky to have a job will absolutely 100% do that. And she's walking in the street undone. And we've had a plan on the books for more than 10 years already to do something about that undone. So, you know, a month ago, we had a presentation from staff and from a consultant about a transportation demand management plan. And the consultant said something real wise, that it's got to be composed of carrots and sticks. And we prefer the carrots, you know, but the only thing he presented as carrots was van share and, what was it? Guaranteed ride home. And both of those are basically just a website. And I don't want to denigrate the opportunity there, but it's really, it's nothing. It doesn't cost much because it's nothing. And the stick is, we're going to charge for parking. Well, that stick works really well. That's what IU does, and that works for a lot of people. But we need to consider some carrots. And you know, I'm not criticizing staff or the consultant, but you can see that they felt a sense of defeat. That the only kind of carrot that they could imagine would be basically if we didn't spend any money. But we need a carrot. We need to give this lady who has to get to work at IU, we need to give her sidewalks. She might not use that sidewalk every day. She might though. She likes going outside. In addition to complaining that she was walking in the road, she posted pictures of the flowers and everything that she could, or the plants that she could see starting to go green on the side of the road. You know, a lot of people will walk if they can, but they can't because there are no sidewalks. And at the Plan Commission meeting where they approved the 4th Street garage, Councilmember Sandberg was there, and she said the same thing a year ago when you all approved the funding, that she can't stand how people always pretend that it's either spend the money on parking garages or spend the money on bike and ped. We treat it like a zero-sum game. Well, if it's not a zero-sum game, then why is this lady walking in the street undone? When are we going to get sidewalks? We really need sidewalks. Staff is discouraged because they know that it's just not an option to ask for sidewalks. Why isn't it an option to ask for sidewalks? Why, when we try to come up with a consultant to come up with an imaginative carrot stick approach to getting people out of the car, staff just knows you guys aren't going to pay for sidewalks. You guys have to pay for sidewalks. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment?
Yes, Randy Paul, I think you're unmuted.
By the way, that loud gong means that there's 60 seconds left in the period to speak. It's not the end. The beeping means the end. All right, go ahead. Mr. Paul, did you want to speak?
His microphone is still muted.
Oh, it's off now. It's muted. It's unmuted now.
No, it's muted.
Still muted.
Not on my screen.
On my screen it is.
On mine, it still shows muted.
There we go. Randy, can you hear us?
There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes.
Actually, I wanted to speak on the beverage tax later, not this one, not this other.
Oh,
okay.
All right. We do have one other person, Daniel Bingham. Give me just a second. Daniel, can you hear us? Can you speak?
Can you hear me?
A little louder.
Can you hear me?
A little louder.
Oh dear. Which microphone are we using here?
That's now we can hear you. Go ahead.
We can, yeah.
All right. I'll bend over to make this comment real quick. I just wanted to follow on to Greg's sidewalk comment. I'm not sure what the average width of sidewalk is in Bloomington, but in the US, it's about 5 to 6 feet. And I wanted to point out that we are supposed to be maintaining social distancing of at least 6 feet between people, which means 2 people cannot pass each other on our sidewalks with the amount of distance that they are supposed to maintain in this pandemic right now. And it's worth thinking about that when we're designing future sidewalks. That's all I had to say.
Thank you. Any further public comment? Mr. Lucas, any requests?
No, we have had a few new folks join the meeting. If you've joined to make a public comment, do so by typing a message in the chat function and let us know that you'd like to make a comment. But no, I've not seen any other requests come in.
And again, as a parliamentarian, I just want to remind you, it's comments on items that are not on the agenda. So the food and beverage tax comments will come later.
Yes, thank you.
We'll hold the floor for another 30 seconds. What's that?
I don't see any other any comments at the moment.
Okay. Well, with that, there is a period at the end of the meeting. We could return to that. But let's now go to legislation for first reading and resolutions. Madam Parliamentarian.
Mr. President, I move that appropriation ordinance 2001 be introduced and read by the clerk by title and synopsis only.
Needs a second. We have a motion and a second. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Opposed, say nay. Will the clerk please read?
Appropriation Ordinance 2001 to specially appropriate from the Food and Beverage Tax Fund expenditures related to the Convention Center expansion in support of local tourism during the COVID-19 emergency. The synopsis is as follows. This ordinance appropriates funds from the Food and Beverage Tax Fund for expenditures to businesses and their employees that together are crucial to the success of the convention center and have been severely affected by the COVID-19 pandemic.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Madam Parliamentarian. Oh, so that's first reading. I'm sorry. I thought we were on second reading. With that, we now go to appointments to boards and commissions. Are there any?
Mr. President, I move that we appoint Nicholas Kappas to the Redevelopment Commission.
Second.
Second.
Motion is second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Yeah.
Opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. That nomination is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have one more.
Mr. Lucas.
Mr. Lucas.
Point of information. I believe some of the guidance that's come out from the Public Access Counselor has called for all votes during these
elections that's right.
to be roll call votes. So the clerk should call the roll on these appointments.
Okay. If we can have a roll call vote on the appointment of Nick Kappas to the Redevelopment Commission. Question, Councilmember Scambluri.
May I ask a question regarding the nomination?
Regarding this nomination or another
regarding
one?
This nomination.
Yes.
Was there an opportunity to interview candidates for this position?
I don't know. I was not on the committee. Is there a member of the committee who can speak to? Well, we have a motion in a second, so it's open for discussion. Is there a member of the nominating committee who would like to speak to Councilman Scambluri's question?
I don't know. Well, I'm not so sure what she's asking. Every interview committee has an opportunity to interview any candidate. So if she's asking, did we hold personal interviews for the RDC? And Ron and, I'm sorry, Councilmember Smith and Councilmember Rosenbarger can jog my memory, but we did not.
Thank you.
Correct.
Any further questions? If not, will the clerk please call the roll on Nick Kappas to the Redevelopment Commission?
Yes. Let's see. Councilmember Scambluri.
I will abstain.
Councilmember Rosenbarger.
Yes.
Sims.
Yes.
Volin.
Yes.
Piedmont Smith.
Yes.
Flaherty.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Sandberg.
Yes.
Rallo.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further nominations?
Mr. President, we have one more. I move that we appoint David Walter, or a reappointment as this were, to the Redevelopment Commission.
Second.
Motion is second. Any discussion? If none, will the clerk please call the roll?
Actually, one question.
Mr. Flaherty.
Since it's for the same commission, I guess I'd like to ask too if interviews were conducted in this case for the reappointment of this nominee. And just as a note for the public, simply because an interview wasn't conducted does not mean that applicants weren't considered based on the merits of their application, resume, et cetera, for folks unfamiliar with the process. But my question is specifically, was Mr. Walter interviewed?
No.
Well, the answer to your question again specifically is no. Us three, as you know, there's three of us on the interview committee. We all did meet. We went over the criteria, the information that the clerk has, plus what came with the applications. And then us as a interview committee made these decisions. Councilmember Rosenberger or Councilmember Smith, would you have anything to add?
No, I agree with you, Jim. That's what we did. We looked at the criteria, we looked at the qualifications and felt that these were the best two candidates.
Thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none, will the clerk please? Sorry?
That's a comment, not a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Councilmember Sandberg?
I don't believe we are absolutely required to do interviewing. They are sending in applications. Those are reviewed. I think many of us do prefer to have interviews because it's an opportunity for us to engage with people. But under the circumstances, I am not sure it is required that there be interviews conducted. Again, if the committees that are taking a look at the apps feel that they've got good candidates and they feel comfortable making the appointments, they're free to do so, if I'm not mistaken.
This is all true.
Mm-hmm.
Any further comment? If not, let's have a roll call vote on the nomination. Madam Clerk?
Councilman Rosenberger?
Yes.
Sims?
Yes.
Wolin?
Yes.
Piedmont Smith?
Yes.
Flaherty?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
Sandberg?
Yes.
Rallo?
Yes.
Scambolery?
I will abstain.
Okay.
And both are names to the Redevelopment Commission. Are there any other nominations to boards and commissions? Seeing none, we will move now to issues of the council schedule. Mr. Sherman?
I'll defer to
Mr. Lucas.
To Mr. Lucas.
A few reminders. There is a council work session that appears on our annual schedule, scheduled for this Friday. We had originally thought we might need to cancel that, but after hearing from the administration about an emergency related ordinance they'd like to bring forward for you all next week, Councilmember Volin, as president, thought that the work session would be a good idea or a good opportunity for the council to hear about that ordinance. So I think the plan is to continue with that work session. Perhaps you all could indicate if you'd be able to attend. That's scheduled for Friday at noon. And I see a few hands going up.
Yes.
More hands? Okay.
I will be about a half hour late, but yes, I can be there.
We will have that at noon, and if needed, I don't believe that's a meeting that CATS or Facebook Live would broadcast. I think we can record that virtual meeting and make it available for any folks who want to watch later on. So I'll try to set that up.
Question, Stephen?
Yes.
Or point of order.
Mr. Rallo?
If the media or am I unmuted? Can you hear me?
No, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Great. Suppose the media or public want to attend this meeting?
The meeting will be Sure. The meeting will still be held on Zoom, and the meeting link will be posted on our council webpage right at the top. So anybody who wants to join like they've joined on this meeting would be welcome to do so, and could still attend that way.
Thank you.
Further questions? Go ahead, Mr. Lucas.
Next week, we've got a meeting on Tuesday, which is a little out of the ordinary. That's a meeting that was also on our annual schedule. And I think that Tuesday meeting was to account for Passover, which begins on Wednesday. Right now, we have the appropriation ordinance that you'll hear about at the Committee of the Whole scheduled for action next week. And it also would be an opportunity to potentially discuss that ordinance that I mentioned that you'll hear about at the work session as well. So just a heads up that that's coming down the pipe. And finally, I wanted to mention the April 15th meeting. That is a regular session that appears on our annual schedule. And after discussing with the administration and planning staff, there's been a request to address the two UDO-related ordinances, the adoption of the conversion maps and some correcting text. And I think the tentative plan is to address those at the April 15th meeting, which would technically be our first regular meeting after those items were certified to the council. So we're still talking about that, but I just wanted to raise that issue. Those things could be adopted in one evening if the council was comfortable doing so. The administration has requested that the council consider that. So that's not for a few weeks, but I wanted to raise that issue as well. So no changes to the schedule, just a heads up on what's coming up.
Thank you, Mr. Lucas. I think all members have been properly advised, and if they have any concerns, they will bring it either to your attention or to leadership attention. With that, we have concluded our business for the moment. Immediately after adjournment, we're going to reconvene as Committee of the Whole, chaired by Councilmember Scambolery, to take up consideration of Appropriation Ordinance 2001, which was first read at this meeting. Any final concerns? If not, this meeting is adjourned.
Welcome back, everyone. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Committee of the Whole for Bloomington Common Council. It is still 1st of April, 2020. Do we need to call the roll? Could you refresh my memory?
No, just go straight to discussion of the item on the agenda.
Okay. With that, we have one agenda tonight, and that's Appropriation Ordinance 2020, which we just heard about. I have a quorum. Presentations from Ms. Philippa Guthrie.
Hold on a second.
I'm sorry.
Do we have a quorum?
Do you have a quorum?
We have a quorum, yes.
Okay.
We have 5. Continue, please.
Good catch. Thank you. I believe we have presentations from Corporation Counsel Philippa Guthrie and Controller Jeff Underwood.
Yes, I'll start.
Turn it over to you.
Thank you. This is a continuation of what was started last week. This is an appropriations ordinance following up on the request that you made to the Food and Beverage Tax Advisory Commission. And that request was for $2 million to be appropriated to assist businesses that are either food and beverage businesses or tourism related businesses. They have been devastated by the executive order from the governor 2004 that essentially shuttered in-person dining. So they are reduced to carry out and delivery. And not all of them can do that. And then other businesses, all of which, the food and beverage businesses are the ones that funnel the taxes to the state government, which then come back to the county. And those have been earmarked, as you all know, in both the county and the city, separate funds for those funds. And the cities has been committed to the convention center expansion project. And these businesses are crucial to that. If they fail, if the food and beverage in particular fail, that really jeopardizes has the potential to jeopardize the funding for the expansion. It also just jeopardizes our community, the economy of our entire community. It's with the university and other attractions, tourism is a big business for Bloomington. And there are other businesses that are also essential to attracting convention center business. So this request is to appropriate $2 million to assist these businesses. As Alex Crowley described earlier, we are thinking of them as bridge loans. And there are other pools of money available that will take longer for them to access. The ordinance itself is fairly simple. It has a lot of whereas clauses that describe the situation, how dire it is. And then there is the request for the $2 million. Section 2 is an attempt to delineate the kind of process that we would be looking at for distributing these funds. We've said that, and this process is still in the works. It's not defined yet, but enlisting community partners to help in assessing the need and distributing the funds. That would include people who do this for a living, for example, forming a committee of people experienced in making loans, setting applicant eligibility criteria, specifying conditions on loans or grants, including but not limited to purposes for which funds may be used and any repayment terms, accepting and approving applications for funding, and then identifying other available aid resources, the funding I mentioned earlier that might be either more appropriate for a particular applicant or that they should look to access first. I do want to point out, I should mention that the Food and Beverage Tax Advisory Commission did approve and recommend that this is an appropriate use of funds from the Food and Beverage Tax Fund. I did want to mention the issue that came up last week about whether or not this was going to be acceptable to the State Board of Accounts. As you know, they are the body that audits the city's use of funds. And we had already issued to you both the memo and the ordinance when they came out with, we asked them for an opinion on this, when they came out with a memo that actually applies statewide. So we are not the only city that has requested to use various funds to aid economic interests and social interests in communities due to this epidemic. And I think you were provided with that memo. Is that correct, Stephen? The SBOA memo. They do not directly address our request, but they provide guidelines for what would be an appropriate use. And I think it clearly supports the city council approving this use. I think my memo and the ordinance cover all of the points that they say they would like to see when they come in and audit in order to support, to not say this is an inappropriate use when they're auditing. And one is that the governing body has adopted a policy in a public meeting that approves the expenditures as an authorized use of public funds. So that would be you next week approving this ordinance. The governing body has received advice of council in writing that the expenditure has a legitimate government purpose and is acceptable under Indiana code during the current emergency declaration. I think that is in the whereas clauses and also in the memo that I provided. There's a sub point under that bullet, which is if the expenditures are from a dedicated fund source, there also must be a determination that the particular fund has a closer connection to the government purpose to be fulfilled than general fund money. That is not currently in this draft of the ordinance, but in consulting with Dan and Stephen and others, including our outside counsel on a lot of these issues, Bruce Donaldson, We thought that inserting another whereas, a second to last whereas, that you could amend the ordinance next week with, and we will provide you with that language that just says, whereas the memo from the city's corporation council, which accompanies this legislation, advises that this expenditure is both appropriate and necessary, and the council explicitly determines that expenditure from this dedicated fund source bears a closer connection to the purposes set forth in this ordinance than the city's general fund. We would just ask you next week to consider amending this draft to include that. And I think that's it. I'm open for questions, as is Controller Jeff Underwood.
Mr. Underwood, did you have comments to add?
No, I'm here to answer any questions you might have.
Okay. With that, we'll move into questions and discussion. Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yes, I wanted to make a motion just to structure the rest of the meeting a little bit. I move that we have 5 minutes of questions per council member per round of questions as a maximum. And then public comment 3 minutes per person. And then coming back to council for comment, a maximum of 3 minutes per council member.
Second.
Councilmember Boland seconds. And correct me if I'm wrong, this needs to be done by roll call vote?
Roll call vote, yeah.
Okay, will the clerk please call the roll? Oh, we may have lost
Is the
her.
clerk present?
Yes. Sorry. Although I stepped away from the computer, so you'll have to repeat your question or statement.
Can you call the roll on the motion to structure debate?
Yes. Councilmember Rallo,
Yes.
Scambaluri,
Yes.
Rosenbarger,
Yes.
Sims,
Yes.
Bolin,
Yes.
Piedmont Smith,
Yes.
Flaherty,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
and Sandberg.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, and that passes. Councilmember Boland, may I ask you to keep time in your timekeeping wizardry?
I will do so.
Okay, with that, thank you again to Ms. Guthrie and Mr. Underwood for being here. Are there questions and discussion? Councilmember Wall.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, this question could go to the corporation counsel or controller, or maybe even the council president. I wonder if we have an estimation of a target date where businesses might receive the funds.
I don't know that we've come up with a date. I think as soon as possible is fair to say.
Just from a procedural standpoint, obviously, next Tuesday will be the required public hearing that was advertised. There's a 10-day requirement for that. Assuming that you approve the appropriation, it'll go to the Department of Local Government Finance for their approval. So we're hoping to have that approved by the end of the week, a week from Friday. So once that's done, the funds from the city's perspective will be available.
And then there is a process of administration of evaluating the applications.
Yes.
And is there any idea what that timeline might be?
I'll let Alex jump in and answer that if he's still on the call.
Yes.
Yeah, so I can speak a little bit to that. So we're hoping to stand up. We're trying to work in parallel path here because speed to market is pretty important. So we want to set up an intake process. We may jump the gun, a little risky, but jump the gun before all of this plays itself out, just so we have things in hand and can start that process. The timing will be a little delicate, but I think what we're trying to do is time it so that the intake and review process can have occurred potentially and completed at least in the first instance of any kind of loan judgments, so that it can be issued out almost immediately following the availability of funds.
Excellent. That's a great idea to have that parallel process. Thank you.
Other questions? Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yes. So in the actual appropriation ordinance, of course, it doesn't specify who is going to come up with the criteria and the guidelines and the process. But am I right to assume that it's the working group, the ESR working group, Mr. Crowley, that you head up?
That will be setting up the administrative process. Is that right?
Well, and even the criteria. I mean, the app ord is very vague on this point.
Yeah, so we intend to, there will be preliminary guidelines, terms that are being published as part of the intake, so people understand if anything is immediately disqualifiable, if they're in business type, for example, that would not be able to be helped, gambling, for example, and some other things. And then we are working feverishly in the background here to set up guidelines to be issued to the advisory function that would allow them to know what the parameters within which they need to work would be. And then those guidelines would then be applied as they review loans coming in.
Yes, thank you. I'm a little bit concerned because there's no council representation officially on that work group that's going to come up with those guidelines. Could we have an official appointment? I mean, Councilmember Scambolari has been attending your meetings anyway. I don't know if Mr. Crowley could speak to that, and maybe Mr. Volan as council president.
Well, frankly, and certainly, Councilmember Scambolari is very involved in what's going on, and we hope that she'll continue to be, and so that's great. I think the final guidelines really need to be set forth and crafted by experts in the field, of which I do not count myself. And so we are looking. As Ms. Guthrie mentioned, we've sent it to outside counsel. We are also having a review by local lending authorities and experts in banking to take a look at them. So those guidelines, I think, are going to benefit a lot from that professional input in the field, and certainly we will be continuing to discuss them, review them, and lock them down, and look forward to having council members come forward with discussions.
So would we be able to see those guidelines before our final vote on this issue?
Yeah, so our hope is, and again, as I said earlier in the earlier part of the previous meeting, that our hope is to have a version 3 of the document that we've already published available. And part of the delay in getting it to you is, in fact, to try to work out some of this detail so that it can be incorporated into that document. So we do anticipate having the guidelines locked in by then, and yes, it would be wholly, relevant to you as you make that final vote. So we look forward to getting those to you in advance of that.
Okay, that allays my concerns. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you. Councilmember Volan?
Yeah, Mr. Crowley, I think maybe to sort of drill down a little bit more into Councilmember Piedmont Smith's question, we're accustomed to the Jack Hopkins process, which is 4 council members, 2 members of the public, or 3 members of the public, or 5 and 2. And of course, this is a very different circumstance. It's much more urgent. Can you tell us a little bit more granularly how you imagine it might work right now, even though you haven't got it, the wordsmithed out? In other words, is there going to be like a 5-person panel or a 7-person panel? Will there be loan professionals on that panel? It sounds like it would be foolish for us to not have people who know how to originate loans. What do you think?
Yeah, so that's exactly right. So I think it probably is in that 5 to 7 range. I think there certainly will be heavy representation from experts in the loan originating field. maybe not exclusively, because we also want some industry representation, for example, or someone who may be able to understand and speak to challenges that a particular sector we're trying to help, could do that a banker might not be able to do. But some mix that has diversity of expertise is critically important to successfully reviewing applications as they come in. And we do expect roughly that sort of 5 to 7 person group, and are working through exactly how that group can get liability protection and issues that might pop up related to some of the process. So we're looking very, very closely at that. And, just to give you a sense of some of the details of some of the decisions that have to be made, we do have to come to terms with the fact that there may be some default on loans. And so one of the questions has to be, what is our appetite for default? How deep do we want to get cut on this? And that will have a direct impact on things like, are we going to require collateral, right? So if you want to minimize that number, then your criteria become more stringent. On the other hand, if you want to be looser, then you have to have an appetite for a deeper default rate. And so, we just have to go through. Another thing I would say that this came up yesterday, and I appreciated Councilmember Flaherty's reminder of it, and it's very much prominent in our thinking. How do you prioritize minority-owned businesses? How do you prioritize women-owned businesses and other, perhaps businesses that are underserved typically in traditional circumstances, and how does that elevate, in the assessment of particular applications? So there are a lot of moving parts, and we're really moving as quickly as we can to try to lock down using the best expertise available to set those up so that they are serving Bloomington in the best possible way.
And I don't mean to add to that burden, but I do wonder how far in advance of the meeting we will have an opportunity to see the version 3 final rules that you are hoping to finish before then.
Well, I think we're going to be working over the week, but my best guess right now is that our hope is to get it locked in and published to you midday on Monday, recognizing that you have to have at least a little review time before your Tuesday evening meeting.
Yeah, I was hoping for at least 24 hours for us to be able to read it. So if you can get it to us by Monday afternoon, we will be, I think, appreciative, and we all recognize the urgency of the moment. So we understand, and I thank you for the answers.
Okay.
Thank you, Councilmember Holland. Other questions? Councilmember Flaherty?
Yeah, just a quick confirmation clarification from Ms. Guthrie. The State Board of Accounts memo guidance specified a few times that the governing body has to have adopted a policy specifying a few things. This appropriations ordinance will serve as that adopted policy. Is that right? We don't have to adopt anything separate. Okay.
Correct.
Just making sure. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Sims.
That's okay. Thank you. Can you hear me fine?
Yep, thank you.
I don't know who this is going to, but Ms. Guthrie in her presentation stated that the food and beverage businesses is where the taxation or the funds were funneled through, collected, if you will, and that there were other businesses that are essential to convention center businesses that may not be food or beverage businesses. Is that correct?
Yes.
That are essential to the tourism. And
yes.
do you have an example or one or two examples of what those might be? In particular, in the downtown area.
Well, arts organizations, for example.
Yes.
And some retail, perhaps. I mean, a lot of people. Bloomington has a very vibrant shopping district with unique shops, and some of them they're not all food and beverage. So That's one idea. People come, I know, and go to a BPP play or a Jewish theater or a Cardinal Stage play. When they come to a convention, they stay over for a weekend and go to these things. So I think we'll know more when people apply.
Okay. I was also thinking more about definitions, I guess. Is that, and I haven't thoroughly went through the State Board of Accounts report thoroughly yet. But do their guidelines define what those businesses are that we're talking about and who's eligible and who's not?
No, the SBO,
okay.
Yeah, the SBOA memo just lays out the kinds of information that they want to see in our records for why we thought this was an appropriate use of the funds, because what they're doing is auditing the funds that we dispense and making sure that they are appropriate under the law. So, I mean, whatever they said in that memo, as long as we document why we're doing it, and this purpose did not seem wrong to them, or they would have told us, I think, and they didn't. And I think what their guidance was designed to do was tell a lot of cities across the state who are looking at all of the funding they have available and trying to figure out how they can help in this situation. So that I'm sure there are all kinds of other funds that are being advocated for use in different ways. So all they did was set out a process for how we can do that and pass their muster. And I think the way we've set this up, I think it will pass muster.
Okay, thank you. So it's safe to say that this is just one fund that's going to be able to possibly help one segment of our commerce, and then there's other, hopefully other funding streams.
Yes, I think the tie is pretty close, though. These are tourism-related businesses, and that's what this fund is designed to do, expand our tourism sector by expanding the convention center and operating it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Rollo.
Thank you. Ms. Guthrie, do we have any worries about liability in terms of if we, I mean, I assume we have a broad latitude of targeting these funds. And so say we want to limit to locally owned businesses only. With that specificity, is that, are we protected if someone objects, for instance, about how they're targeted?
Yes, if we set up an application process with criteria, we're allowed to set the criteria.
Okay, terrific.
Are there other first round questions?
Isabel.
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Well, it was a second round question, but if you're ready for second round, I'll go.
Seeing no more first round questions, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So Councilmember Rollo raised a point that I wanted to ask about, and it may be a question that's most appropriate for Mr. Crowley if he's still available. And that is about prioritizing locally owned businesses and how we would define locally owned business, you know, whether what am I thinking of? You know, when somebody local owns a chain.
A franchise.
Franchise. Thank you very much. So could you speak to what the working group's views are at this point as far as prioritizing locally owned?
Yeah, I mean, it's as I mentioned earlier, it's pretty fluid. You know, we do recognize that franchises are locally owned, right? So that's an important thing to recognize. We also recognize that a franchise may have a corporate structure that is organizing to support it in a way that a locally owned independent business may not. And so I think we have to, the short answer, and the honest answer is I just don't know yet. And we have to really drill down and set that up the way that makes the most sense. I do want to, you know, reinforce that franchises hire locally, are often owned locally. The income can often reside, with a corporate parent in some part, but also a lot of it flows back to the community. So I wouldn't necessarily say we're out of hand that we would discount them, but I do think that we need to recognize that there is going to be a difference between a shop that is independently owned by someone who lives here and a shop that is owned as a franchise here, and what kind of resources they may or may not have access to from a corporate parent. So that kind of question is very much top of mind for us, and we have to really drill down and decide so that we can apply limited resources appropriately.
Okay, so I will look for your conclusions in the final draft of the report then.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Other second round questions? In which case I'll add mine as well. This is perhaps for Mr. Crowley, probably for Ms. Guthrie. Welcome back. But could you comment on the uses of this money once it actually arrives at a business? So do you envision restrictions? Could it only be used for debt service? Could it be used for payroll? Could you speak to those kinds of things?
Well, we've already laid out in a draft of terms that would actually be sort of entry-level terms that monies cannot be used for things like paying equity investors. There's some basic kind of ownership level restrictions that we want to exclude use of the money for. So we've already thought through some of that. We're trying to list out the types of expenditures that can be made using the monies, and try to be as clear as possible for that. So it would be, again, it would be a broad, expense base, but it could be payroll, could be rent, it could be mortgage, it could be, a number of those types of activities. What we don't want is people, pocketing the money as owners and not distributing it or using it explicitly to stabilize the business in the short term, pending access to more significant monies coming from federal stimulus.
Thank you. And we'll see more of that in version 3 of the report, correct?
Yeah, it's already been itemized, I think, in high level, and version 2. But yeah, we do intend to clarify those guidelines.
Great. Thank you. Councilmember Rosenbarger, was that a question or no? Okay. I surprised you, didn't I? Other questions before we go to public comment? I'm not seeing any. Oh, I'm sorry. Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
It's me again. So last week, I think it was Councilmember Flaherty who asked, oh, I'm sorry. Am I coming through okay?
Yeah, you're
in and out a little bit. But.
Okay. So last week, the question was brought up as to whether these funds could be applied for by individuals, perhaps employees or former employees of businesses that have been hard hit by the COVID-19 and economic downturn. What is the working group's current thinking on that? And I need to apologize. I have not read the second draft of the report. I didn't have enough time to do that. But if you could just speak to that, whether you think that will be an option or whether it will really be focused on the business owners.
We've evolved a little bit, I think, since last week. I do think that we have much more of a focus on businesses and nonprofits that have employees. So ultimately, employees will benefit, but I think at this point we're less convinced that a targeted program for individuals makes sense, and that instead we really should be focusing in, especially given the fact that the CARES Act, it has direct payment to individuals that seems to be staged to flow pretty quickly. That convinced us that it probably makes sense for us to really be focusing on more of the employer and nonprofit sector that is not being covered by funding from social services funding, to really try to leverage the funding into wider benefits.
Thank you.
Councilmember Flaherty.
Sure, I'll follow up on the same. And we had this discussion a little bit last night in the Sustainable Development Committee meeting. And actually, I'll just mention for the benefit of the public too, that there was a fairly robust discussion about all this last night. And you can view that meeting on CATS if you want to see other things that were said already about this and questions that were answered. But my question, I guess, relates to the same question Councilmember Piedmont Smith had, and how to make sure we are benefiting workers, often lower wage workers in Bloomington who are struggling right now. So we talked about how, we are complementing state and federal aid and dollars that are coming in. And in particular, I think two things we discussed were the Paycheck Protection Program as part of the CARES Act, which will allow for businesses to have loans. And if they cover payroll with those loans and it's retroactively dated, I think into February, that those loans will be forgiven. So that's one way they can cover payroll with a greater resource potentially than we have to offer. Second is the increase in unemployment benefits, bringing people, I think, basically to 100% of lost wages. So those are two possible avenues for out of work employees or potentially out of work employees in Bloomington to be able to stay whole. I have 2 points or questions sort of related to that. The first is I want to highlight and emphasize again the importance of the wraparound services or the navigation services for our local business community as part of this effort, that we need to make sure we're being really proactive in making sure businesses locally know how to leverage that aid to benefit their employees. And two, which is the question part, I think, is just like we're concerned about timing gaps for the business community and not having funds available soon enough when they're in dire straits now, I have the same concern about individuals that, yes, there's aid coming from federal dollars and elsewhere, but there's a timing gap there too. Today's April 1st, people have rent and all sorts of other bills due, and they probably haven't seen any aid yet. So my question essentially is probably to Mr. Crowley, how do we, I guess the social services is one piece, but how do we make up that gap and address that timing gap for individuals? I don't know. It's a difficult question, but I just wanted to acknowledge that gap exists for individual, employees as well as the businesses themselves, and wanted to make sure we're thinking through how best to meet that gap for individuals as well. Any additional thoughts?
Well, I guess I would say that, my understanding is that SBA and other sort of small business loan structures may be taking 8 to 12 weeks to come through. So that's a pretty significant gap. And my understanding of the CARES Act is that could be significantly shorter when checks arrive in the mail for people for the individual payment structure. I'm trying to get up to speed on exactly what the best guess of what that could look like. It is not available today, certainly, but it probably won't take 8 to 12 weeks. So there's going to be a more aggressive move to get, I think, that kind of money out. And I think that I have to be frank, we just don't have the capacity nor the ability to cover individuals in our community to the extent that would be required. And I think we just have to stay a little bit disciplined on recognizing what we can and can't do. And while absolutely there is a need from that, I totally hear what you're saying. I'm just worried that the system could just collapse onto itself if we tried to solve everybody's problem. And so I think what we're trying to do is say, all right, what can we do? What can we do well? What can we do given some of the longer delays that are going to be hitting? How does that get leveraged through programs that we're proposing to put in place? Will have an effect on individuals. If a sandwich shop is able to distribute the monies that we would make available to employees in the near term, the individual then benefits. But there's naturally going to be a whole segment that we just don't have the capability to support, I think, and we just have to keep our eye on the ball, I guess, and try to stay disciplined on the things that we can do well. Otherwise, I think it's going to be problematic for the whole system.
And that's time.
Other questions from council members before we go to public comment?
I had one question.
Councilmember Sims? I'm sorry, Smith. You're both right next to each other on my screen, sorry.
In the memorandum from the state of Indiana, there's the line in there that I was just going to ask if you could say something about was if the expenditures are from a dedicated fund source. That sentence says that the particular fund has a closer connection to the government purpose to be fulfilled in general fund money. Ms. Guthrie, can you kind of say a little bit about that? What does that mean?
Sure. In our case, for example, the dedicated fund is the food and beverage tax fund. And the connection to the use we would like to make of it is supporting businesses that A, have supported that fund, or B, are tourism related, which is what the statute says we can use the funds for. Our general fund is not that targeted. This is literally targeted to the kinds of businesses we want to support. So in our mind and I think legally, that is a closer nexus between the fund and the proposed use than the general fund would be for that use. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I understand. So that means in crafting the policies and the ways that the money will be given out, it'll just be language in there that ties that to make it a closer connection. Is that how it's going to work?
Well, I think the connection just exists by virtue of the types of businesses that we're saying we would like to support, which is food and beverage and tourism related. But we are proposing to add a whereas clause that states that we believe this use of this fund is better than using the general fund for this purpose, so that we would cover that in the ordinance.
You can always have another whereas, right?
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Other questions before I chime in? Here's the question, I think mostly from Mr. Underwood and Ms. Guthrie. The food and beverage tax was originally conceived of to support the creation of an expanded convention center. And we have made some commitments in that regard and some we may need to undo. Could you comment on that process and what council may need to be aware of going forward?
I'll speak to that. As you know, yes, we encumbered funds late last year for the design of the convention center and for a garage. Obviously, that project has been put on hold, so we'll be able to appropriate monies that we expect will be spent before that project starts back up. We will then have to take a look at the collections, and by law, you're limited to the amount of cash you actually have in it. So, regardless of the amount that gets appropriated, because in a general budget, we're looking at an 18-month period. If the revenues don't come in high enough, along with the cash balance, you can't overspend your up to the appropriation amount. You can only spend the combination of cash on hand and your revenue. So we would be prohibited from doing that, but we'll take a look at that as we go along throughout the year. And as we get ready to start that project back up, obviously, we'll look at the cash balance and the amounts that are available to us.
Thank you. I'd like to ask members of the public who wish to comment to please let Mr. Lucas know through the comment section that you have an interest in doing that and start queuing up.
The chat function.
And going back to council for a final go round. Question? Okay, let's go to public comment then. And Councilmember Piedmont Smith, refresh our memory, these are limited to 3 minutes.
That's right.
I thought I thought Kate had a question.
Kate, did you have
I do.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I do. It's fine. It's okay, of course. I guess I just wanted to ask in general, when the statute says this should be used for like related tourism or economic development projects, I mean, I think that is hard to define, right? So, I mean, I was just thinking about this TED Talk, this woman, she travels and she takes a suitcase with like only underwear and then buys all of her clothes for a conference, like at like secondhand stores when she's at her conference city, right? So like, would things like secondhand stores be included in this tourism or related economic projects? And I don't feel like I've heard us talk about or related economic projects. So like, how is that related and are we using that for this?
I don't know if Alex is a better person to respond to this. I don't know that we are talking about economic development projects. I think we're talking about tourism related in that language. As far as secondhand stores,
if I can jump in, I think at this point, what we want to do is minimize the restrictions to the extent possible, and try to keep, the secondhand store is a kind of interesting cultural thing that we've got in Bloomington, right? And it's part of who we are, and it's an interest. If you're talking about like funky clothing stores, for example, I mean, what we want to do is make sure that we're keeping our options open. We don't want to necessarily disqualify a business that's outright. And we want to make sure that the advisory committee has the latitude it needs to make good decisions, and fund what it believes to be robust businesses that can come back and thrive. So I think the broader we can allow the ordinance to be, the better it can be for Bloomington over the long term.
Dad? Someone heard? Any other questions from council members? Seeing none, let's go to the public. Mr. Lucas, who do we have queued up?
We do have a few folks. I think Randy Paul should be able to.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, Mr. Paul, please go ahead.
Okay, well, first I wanted to thank you for allowing us to participate by Zoom. It's something that is a real help, and I hope that you don't end this after the crisis is over, because I think I could make a really strong argument that people with disabilities need this all the time, not just during a crisis period. But anyway, back to the topic here. My hope is the focus as far as guidelines is that you're only looking at $2 million. You got a limited amount of help you can give out, and that we look at it from the standpoint of who can you help the most and who need it the most. And one concern I've got are the employees, who I think are suffering badly. But the other one is on the business side. There are going to be some businesses that are going to show a loss of revenue during this period. And there are going to be some businesses who might very well go bankrupt and not survive this. And since this is public money, I would hope the focus would be on those businesses that are so marginal that if they don't get an infusion of cash, it might very well mean the end of their business. They don't have the ability to go to the banks in the private sector and get help. So what was mentioned earlier about collateral, I think we ought to focus on companies that don't have a lot of collateral, that can't go out on their own to the banks, versus a company that will, certainly show a loss of income, but they will survive. And also with the focus of those companies that are underserved, minority companies, those are the ones where they don't have any options. And if this is going to be public funds, I think this would be an ideal way to help those people out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Paul. Mr. Lucas, who's next?
Give me just 1 second. I believe Daniel Bingham wanted to make another comment. Should be ready to go.
Yep. Can you hear me?
Quite well.
All right. I think it's really important when we're thinking about this to remember that business owners have all the knowledge, have all the power between them and their employees. And they also get to walk away with the profits on the basis of the idea that they are supposedly the ones taking all the risk. I went and looked up the businesses we're primarily talking about when we're talking about this relief. It's heavily the hospitality industry and the restaurant industry. So I went and looked at the Bureau of Labor Statistics data for Bloomington of what people working in that industry make. The median salary for a cook is $24,000 a month, which means their unemployment insurance before the CARES Act was $960 a month. For food prep, median was $25,000 a month, so you're looking at $989 in unemployment. For bartenders, the median was $20,000 a month, so you're looking at $794 median unemployment. For waiters, it was $20,000, similarly $700. For dishwashers, it was $19,000, similarly $700. Bloomington's median rent is $835 a month. So, we started having this discussion because a bunch of local business owners and restaurateurs signed a petition asking that this money be used in this way to help them. In that petition, they admitted that they were laying off their workers and asking them to survive on this unemployment insurance, which at that time, pre-CARES Act, was not enough to pay rent. So in a pandemic, they were placing their employees at risk of being homeless rather than taking the risk of supporting them, which begs the question, could some of these businesses that were laying off their employees have continued to support their employees? And the answer, unfortunately, is yes. One of them in an online conversation revealed to me enough about their business that I was able to calculate their average revenue using benchmarks for the past couple of years, calculate their savings rate, and calculate that they could have maintained their payroll for at least a month, potentially more. This was one of the more successful business owners in town, but by no means the most successful business owner in town, and this was a signatory to the petition. We have to remain aware of the power structures ingrained in our society, and it really bothers me that we are talking about helping and bailing out those who are already enriched and empowered on the basis that they are supposedly shouldering the risk, when they, in fact, in this crisis, have the power to protect themselves from the risk and have laid off their employees, placing them in risk of destitution and homelessness when we are in a pandemic, basically shifting their risk right onto the backs of their employees. We should be talking about how to help those people. We need to be keeping people off the streets. We need to be keeping people in their homes where they can shelter in place. And we need to be asking business owners to do what, the deal is. They take the risk, they get the reward. If they want the reward, they should be shouldering the risk. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bingham. Mr. Lucas, who's next?
I believe we've got Susan Bright. Give me just one moment. Hi, Susan, are you with us?
I'm here.
Ms. Bright, please go ahead.
Hello, I'm Susan Bright. I'm owner and CFO of Nick's English Hut. And I've lived and worked in our community for 40 years, and I'm proud of what the council does and all our community members to make this a great city to live and work. I'd like to give you a perspective from a small business owner and what we are going through to keep our business going and to reopen with a healthy financial business model. We like most businesses during this COVID-19 epidemic will need loans to stay in business. We're about 1 week away from using our funds up. We generally have about a $200,000 expense monthly bottom line for our expenses, and that's about how much we keep in the bank, $200,000. So we've got about 1 week left to finish paying bills up. And we have kept our payroll going after we were forced to close for these last 2 weeks. So employees did have the opportunity to work. And what kind of work could they do? Basically cleaning, tearing down, closing up shop. Our pre-COVID-19 business model, we were able to manage our expenses wisely in proportion to our revenue. Now we have to absorb loans and continue our healthy business model. The Paycheck Protection Program isn't as ideal as I was led to believe from the media. I went ahead and figured out how much money we'd be eligible for based on a $1.5 million payroll a year. We're eligible for $416,000. That covers 2 months of normal expenses, but we're not open with normal operations. So, I mean, our expenses I'm projecting are going to be about $122,000 a month. What I'm thinking is our health insurance, our employee health insurance premiums, our utilities, our rent, and our payroll are the critical ones that need to get paid while we're closed. With that said, if you take an 8-week period for those 4 categories, plus payroll, because I'm keeping our 5 salary workers on payroll, plus another part-time employee, we need $100,000 just to cover that 8-week period for utilities, rent, payroll, and employee health insurance premiums. I think if you could award FabTac money to us who need it for those categories, that would be a great start, because our loan forgiveness for that $416,000 loan is only $7,000, maybe $8,000 that will be forgiven. The rest of it, we're going to have to pay interest on for the next 10 years. And if this keeps going, I don't even think, the 416 is going to get us very far, but we'll cross that bridge when it happens. Restaurants also have a lot of food that was lost. So we lost about $10,000 to date. We might lose more if the stuff in the freezer don't hold up. And then we're also going to have some labor costs to reopen. So I took our labor costs to tear down and clean up. And that was about $10,000. And I'm just
Ms. Craig?
Yeah.
You're at time now. Could you please finish up your comments?
Yep. And I'm just figuring that's how much in startup costs we'll need. So like I said, if the FabTac money can go to those 4 categories to help us, I think that's a good start, and we'll go from there. Thanks for listening. Yep.
Mr. Lucas?
Yes, we've got Mr. Vox Booker. I believe you're unmuted and ready to go. Can you hear us?
Absolutely.
Mr. Booker, please go ahead.
Council, first of all, it's a pleasure to be with you this evening. I appreciate you all taking up this tremendous effort in this uncertain time. Your leadership is comforting. I'm a little dismayed that in a time that, some of us have mentioned where we're facing a huge part of our population having food insecurity and worrying about just making rent and childcare and those other things, that one of the areas that I see, a great deal of focus is on bailing out businesses. I think it can be great to bail out businesses if you're going to support their employees. I'm a big fan of bailing out people rather than entities. I also want to make sure that I say here, I hear a lot that there's a lot of effort to be moving very quickly because of the time crunch. But I would ask that the council please do their due diligence in serving as a check to the mayor's administration. We've gone down this path many, many times before where there's some inconsistency between the view of the administration and some council members. I want to make sure that if there's a business that we're helping, we're doing it because we want to keep those businesses employees. We heard the owner of Nick's speak to that they had kept their employees on payroll. I commend them for that. I think that priority above all else should be to businesses that have already kept their employees on payroll during this difficult time. One of the areas that we'll also mention making minority business owners a priority. And we get that line a lot where minority businesses are a priority, but we rarely get any teeth and legislation on that. I would love to ask that in this new body that's being formed to evaluate this loan process, that we would have minority representation among that. Also, once again, I love the arts in our community. It's one of the reasons I live here, but I also want to make sure that we're still holding up people. The arts will always be a thing. Businesses will come and go, but people are the spirit of Bloomington. I want us to reevaluate. I know that you're not the body that directly controls this, but I would love for us to reevaluate the viability of the convention center and continuing with this tax, especially the food and beverage tax, that is, especially while businesses are already under this constraint of this time. There's no pressing great need that our community has to have a convention center at the moment. Am I at time?
You're at time.
All righty. Council, thank you very much once again for your time. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Mr. Booker. Mr. Lucas, who do we have next?
I muted myself that time. We've got Miss Erin Predmore, who I believe is ready to make a comment.
Thank you. Ms. Predmore, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Council. And I'd like to thank you for allowing my picture in lieu of what I really look like here this evening on Zoom. So I'm the president and CEO of the Greater Bloomington Chamber of Commerce, and it's been a great privilege to work with the rest of the team that Alex mentioned earlier on this policy brief for you guys and this opportunity to help some of our businesses in the community to survive this crisis. And I just wanted to take a minute to respond to a couple of the comments made by some other community members about concerns about employees not being looked after in this, which I do understand. My career prior to being at the Chamber was in nonprofit management and community counseling. And one of the reasons I'm drawn to this job is because I recognize the link between economics, mental health, personal stability, and all the ways those things are interwoven. And I think it's really important to be able to keep all of those things at the front of our mind during a crisis like this, so we make sure everybody's going to be okay. One of the things that in the conversations we've had as a committee, as an advisory group, has been talking about how payroll is going to be one of the primary focuses. So we talked about our term sheet and also the application. That's one of the things that I've been working on personally. And so I can tell you on the application, we say, are you going to use this for payroll for your employees? Have you made a good faith effort to keep your employees on? Are there other essentials that you need these funds for, like rent or supplies, those types of things to be able to keep your business open? Just recognizing that without these businesses, we wouldn't have employees and they wouldn't have income. So how do we keep this thing moving so that everybody can get back going as quickly as they can? And I also wanted to, I know Mr. Booker had asked about minority businesses, women-owned businesses, and that's also part of the application as well. We're asking for that information so that as the application's evaluated and the decisions made, that we're able to have that data to be able to evaluate those applications in that full way to put the picture. So I hope that helps and allays some of your concerns about that. It has been a good process with a team that's really trying to take this whole picture in mind to keep the community going.
Thank you, Ms. Predmore. Mr. Lucas, who do we have next?
I believe we've got Miss Jennifer Pearl, who should be unmuted and ready to comment.
Ms. Pearl, please go ahead.
All right, thank you so much. I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Jennifer Pearl, and I'm the president of the Bloomington Economic Development Corporation. And it's been a pleasure to serve on the ES&R committee alongside Alex and Aaron and so many other partners as we're trying to help our community through this time. I would like to second many of the things that Aaron said, all of the things that Aaron said so eloquently, and also just add that, the work that we're doing, when we look at economic development, it's people first. And looking at not only our role in the Bloomington community, but the role that we serve in the region as well. We have about 70,000 people that are working here. About 16,000 come from outside communities, and our ability to be able to keep these businesses moving along and payroll moving along has a multiplier effect. So anyone that is still on payroll and can move forward is also putting money back into the economy. There's also many non-funding mechanisms for support that our committee is looking at as a way to be a multiplier for the funding that would be put out there. And so that's a consideration as well. But, everything that Ms. Predmore had said regarding a people-focused approach is something I would like to second. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pro. Mr. Lucas, who do we have next?
I don't believe we've got anybody else queued up at the moment. And I've not seen anybody new join the meeting recently. So that may be it for now.
Okay, let's give it another maybe 30 seconds. Just to make sure we have all the opportunity we can provide.
And folks can either use the chat function, which is should be at the bottom of your screen, or raise your hand, which I believe is also an option. I've seen a couple folks use that. So either option will let us know that you'd like to make a comment.
And Mr. Lucas, does Facebook play a role in this evening or no?
This is being streamed on Facebook Live. Mr. Krebs from the mayor's office is running that stream, and I believe he's been responding to questions throughout the meeting, but we don't have access to those comments on our meeting. But he's been monitoring that chat and responding to folks that way.
Okay. Thank you for that. Any further comments from the public? Okay, let's come back to council then for final comments this evening. Councilmember Volan.
Yeah, I just want to urge my colleagues to read the report over the next few days. I know that it's not the final draft, but it'll prepare you for it. While I am sure that there are going to be some substantial changes, you can't wait until Monday to read draft 3. You need to read draft 2 now. It's 48 pages long. It's quite dense. But it was the first time that I actually saw any kind of light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, there is a way to break down this huge problem. With respect to the dollars in question, I did a little math in my head. The 1% food and beverage tax resulted last year in just under $3.5 million. That means that the entire Bloomington food and beverage sector generated $350 million last year. Divide that by 12 and you have just under $30 million a month that the sector generates. Now, a 2-month period, the period that it would take to replace the entire sector would be $60 million. And there's only $6 million in the food and beverage tax budget. So that should give you a sense of how impotent we really are to fix things alone. We are utterly dependent on money coming from the CARES Act. Let's not make any two bones about it. This is a catastrophic moment, and we have to respond as judiciously as we can. This is why I'm eager to hear if the money that we use from food and beverage money could act as itself as a multiplier, that it would allow lending institutions to loan greater amounts or to forgive more to the institutions that desperately need it. I do sympathize with the idea that a restaurant should not be rewarded for laying off its workers. I do know that the CARES Act says that if you, whatever your payroll was on March 24th, that's what they'll fund. So I don't know if that counts people that they laid off because they thought there's no end to this and we have to shut down. So, I'm willing to forgive businesses if they rehire their employees. But this is the kind of thing we need to think about. And so I just want to urge you all to take a good look at the report It's quite thorough, even though it's in draft form, and it sort of it's a small indicator of the enormity of the task before us. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? Councilmember Sandberg.
First of all, I have read the report, and even though it is going to be updated and is going to be changing with the fluid situation and all the ongoing effort of this group, it is quality. It is really good. It was put together in a relatively short amount of time. We are in crisis. And along with that crisis comes the opportunity for us to do everything we possibly can to salvage jobs, to salvage all the things that Bloomington is known for. And but let us be clear, we are not the federal government. And I think I heard the word bailout used several times this evening as I have been carefully listening to all the comments. And this is clearly not a bailout. If anything, this is a bridge. This is bridge funding. This is gap funding. And from what I have read and what I have observed in talking to the members of this committee, they are the experts. These are the people who understand what some of the small margins our local and small businesses have been operating under. And with this crisis, if these businesses go under, this is going to do not good things for the Bloomington tax base. And so we're going to find ourselves having to do a lot more with a lot less if we can't do everything in our power to keep the wheels turning, to keep the shops open, to keep the jobs that this community is going to need. And so, again, I understand all the good input from people who are concerned about the individual employees, but also those employees are not going to get rehired. They are not going to get jobs back if we don't do some serious bridge support for the local businesses. Again, in talking to many of them, there's fear. Some businesses are going to make it and some are not. And so we are looking, I don't want to be a doom and gloomer here, but we're looking at a really different Bloomington on the other end of this crisis. And so basically what I'd like to say is I support this committee. I trust them. These are the ones that understand the business community, the chamber, the BEDC, all the other reps, all the people from the city's Economic and Sustainable Development Department. These are the people we need to rely on to make these very, very difficult decisions. I trust them. I support them. I'm looking forward to the next edition of this report. I think it's going to help us immensely. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? Councilmember Smith?
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think that what brought it home for me was listening to Miss Bright from NICS, our great institution in Bloomington, and you hear that it's going to be really hard to deal with the fiscal issues ongoing. And in my mind, after she was talking about the amount of the specificity with the payroll and keeping the business going, I'm $2 million, maybe a down payment, right? It's kind of frightening, depending how long this goes on. And I would like to thank everybody at the city who's working on that task force with Councilman Rallo. It's really important. You're doing a great job. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Smith. Other comments? Councilmember Piedmont Smith?
Yes, I'd really like to thank Alex Crowley and the group, the working group that has been doing such diligent and quick work on this project. I'm trying to, for some reason, I cannot remember what the whole name is, Economic
Stabilization
and Recovery Work Group. Thank you. really, we as a city rely on experts in the field to help us in difficult times like this, and they have really stepped up to help in this case. And in addition to the members of the working group, I think there have been other people who have been consulted and have really helped frame the report and frame the draft guidelines, which we will see finalized next week. So I appreciate everybody who has helped. I also recognize, and I want to emphasize to the public, that this is just a small amount of bridge funding. We will not be able to help everybody who applies to the extent that they apply for help, to the dollar amount that they apply for. But I do think this is a big step in the right direction, and I think we can help some businesses stay in business, and that will help their employees as well. So I like everything I've heard so far as what the working group is thinking for the guidelines, to emphasize payroll, to emphasize locally owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, and to have some guidance as to, you cannot spend the money to just enrich yourself as a business owner or your investors. So I look forward to reading the report. Well, I don't know if I look forward to it because it's going to be gloomy, but I appreciate the work, and I will be reading draft 2 and then looking for draft 3 on Monday. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Piedmont Smith. Other comments? Councilmember Flaherty, and then Councilmember Sims.
Yeah. Thank you again to the ESRWG for all of its really diligent work this last week to paint a clear picture of what some of the needs are and what we can do about it with food and beverage tax dollars, with other types of support and more. Also, for the benefit of the public, version 2 that was mentioned of this report, it is a 50-page report, but the body of the text is really only 27 pages. And depending on what you're interested in, you can dig in. It's available in tonight's packet on the council's website. So, and as you heard, version 3 will be coming out early next week sometime, with some changes in line with conversations that took place in this meeting and other evolutions that are coming as people keep working on this. I want to just emphasize again, I think I certainly hear the comments of Mr. Booker and Mr. Bingham, and the questions I've been asking have really been looking at, workers more than anybody are the folks who are struggling in our communities right now, especially low wage workers, folks in the service sector, and figuring out how we can make sure they're part of this conversation. I certainly take the point. Yeah, if the business goes under, there's no jobs, and people don't have a job to come back to. That's true. But I want to just make sure we're keeping it as part of what we're thinking about when we're looking at this bridge funding. So the navigation center wraparound support to make sure that businesses are fully aware of and pursuing the actions they need to take in order to ensure that their employees can get the most amount of support and benefit and aid that they can from the federal government or state. Additionally, I guess I'd like to hear a little more information. I'll be doing some research myself, certainly, but Mr. Crowley sort of mentioned that he doesn't think the time gap for aid coming to workers or folks who've been laid off will be as long as for businesses, which may well be true. So I'd like to look into that more, and if the working group could look into that more and have a bit more information for us by next week, that would be great. It occurred to me we could ask as part of the application process and maybe part of our evaluation criteria, we could ask what the business's plan is for their employees. We should have an understanding of how many people have they laid off. Are they keeping people on payroll? Do they intend to use any of this money for that or not? And not necessarily, that's not necessarily the best use for it if there are other funds available. But I think having an understanding of how they intend to prioritize their employees and what their plan is for that would actually go a long way in helping us evaluate applications. And I'll stop there for tonight. But again, thank you very much to that working group for all the hard work so far and for answering our questions tonight. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Sims.
Thank you. I also too want to thank the work group for all the work that they're doing. Many of us, myself and many of my colleagues, we have had the pleasure over the years of working with people like Ms. Pearl, Ms. Predmore, Alex Crowley. So we are well aware of their talents. And I think we're well aware of how difficult their job is right now and some of the decisions that are going to have to be made. I was encouraged from hearing from Ms. Predmore some of the questions, some of the criteria that will be addressed. And I know there's limitations, but some of those questions pointed to the fact that the emphasis could be as much as, or I want the emphasis to be as much as possible on how we can help the people, the workforce of those businesses and in that industry. We know there's limitations. We know that may not pan out to be the biggest bang for the buck, but I think as long as that's part of the thought process and keeping it at the forefront, I think that's important. Also, I think that's fundamentally important is some of, or much of the public comment that we're getting even through this format. It's good to see that the public is still engaged, even if they're not so much commenting. There were many participants, so that's encouraging to me. And I would like to ask everyone to stay involved and let's get through this together. I think we'll do better than some of us may think. At least that's what we could hope. So thank you all.
Thank you. Other comments? With that, I'll just add mine. Anyone who has known me longer than a week has probably heard me tell the story of a former boss I had who was an economist by trade and was asked what he would do to solve all our financial problems. And he looked that person right in the eye and said, the first thing I would do is remind you there are no solutions. There are only trade-offs. And I think we are seeing that brought to light in this process. And I especially want to applaud the groups who are wrestling with this on the front line. Certainly all of the employers and the businesses, the individuals, and especially the 3 working groups that we heard about tonight who are trying to find the optimal balance of trade-offs in these circumstances. I've only worked with one of those groups directly, and I saw them go from a collection of ideas to a report in 72 hours. So I am grateful for all of your hard work, not even as a council member, but as a resident. I'm glad that we have your talents to rely on. So thank you for that. As next steps, I look forward to seeing version 3 of the report from the Economic Stabilization Recovery Group as soon as that's available. And I look forward to a more robust conversation when we can reconvene next Tuesday evening. And I believe we will see Mr. Lucas. I believe we'll see that packet by the end of the week, correct? And then likely a supplemental packet on Monday with the full report.
Yes, we'll release our normal legislative packet this Friday with as much material as we can for next week's meeting. As you saw this week, we had to supplement last Friday's packet a couple of times as we got more documents and information. So we'll release what we've got when we've got it as best we can.
Okay, thank you. And with that, is anything else for the good of the order? Okay, and I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Well, no, you take a vote to recommend.
I'm sorry, what? Oh, yes. Is there a recommend due path? Isabel, can you unmute?
Sorry, there you go.
I move due path.
Second.
Okay. Well,
you need to unmute all the members now so that we can vote. This has to be a roll call vote.
Okay. Can you unmute Dave, please, as well?
He may need to click something on his end.
And Susan.
There you go. Oh, I'm sorry. Got the Brady Bunch box going on. Can't see y'all. There you go.
Well done. So, and will the clerk call the roll, please?
Okay. So it looks
this is
like
on appropriation ordinance 2001.
Right.
And this is a yes or no vote. Recommendation do pass.
Second.
Okay. So Councilmembers Camilleri,
Yes.
Rosenbarger,
Yes.
Sims,
Yes.
Volin,
Yes.
Piedmont Smith,
Yes.
Flaherty,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Sandberg,
Yes.
Rallo.
Yes.
Thank you.
And that was 900, I believe. Good. Thank you, everyone. And is there other business? Councilmember Roller.
I'm waving goodbye.
Oh. And do we need a motion to adjourn? Thank you, Councilmember. 1 second. And do we need a roll call vote on this type of motion?
No.
No. It's a
All
committee.
right. We are
Good night,
adjourned.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Night, everybody.
Night.
Good job, Sue.